We are in the country that incarcerates the most number of people in the world, and I work on the outside mostly. But I spoke about like marginalization of young people. They can't vote, they can't run for office, they can't make campaign contributions, and yet they can work. They can be incarcerated for decades, right? Like we have huge hypocrisies in terms of how our law relates to young people. For those young people who are mobilizing, academics and practitioners, we often silence them by trying to speak for them. And so that's another sort of like area. And then the third I think I spoke about was access to justice.
Welcome to Between the Briefs, a podcast by Steno. We share practical tips and expert insights on the pretrial process, court reporting, and legal technology to keep you updated on how technology is revolutionizing the litigation process and the wider legal sector. I'm your host, Adrian Saya.
I'm your host, Adrian Saya, and today we're honored to have Sarah Medina-Camiscoli with us. Sarah is an attorney, educator, and activist working at the intersection of education law, social movements, and youth empowerment. She is the founder of the Peer Defense Project and currently an assistant professor of law at Rutgers Law School. Sarah's work amplifies the voices of young people in movements for social change, focusing on how youth-led activism can challenge systemic inequities and transform legal systems. Sarah is also deeply involved in creating pathways for youth to access legal tools and build power through advocacy. Today, we'll discuss her personal journey in law and activism, as well as the critical role that legal technology can play in empowering young leaders and student activists. Sarah, welcome to the show. How are you doing today?
I am grateful to be here with like-minded creative people. How are you?
Doing very well, and we're very excited to have you on the show. I know Joe was buzzing about it. So, Joe, tell me, do you have any questions right off the bat for Sarah?
Yeah, Sarah, I'm fascinated by your background. And I guess right off the bat, my immediate question is, like, what are the biggest challenges that you're seeing right now in everything that's going on in this world when it comes to like staying sort of mission driven and motivated and then conveying that to this emerging group of talented minds?
Sure. So I can share a little bit about what I think are my main concerns, and then I can do a little bit of background to share how I got here and what sort of led me to have these concerns. So I really think that there are three areas relevant to this community here and this podcast that are very concerning to me right now. There are many things that are concerning. But first is the marginalization of young people under law and the lawlessness that is often accepted prior to this administration, but also during this administration as well. The next thing I would say is the ways in which we have silenced and overlooked mobilized young people and students or dismissed them. And then the last piece I would say is thinking about ethical access to justice and legal tools. So really this combination of how is the law smothering and harming young people? How are legal professionals and scholars and lawmakers silencing young people? And then how are we failing to open up the gates to the tools that young people would need to really shift how we use and understand the law? And most importantly, remain engaged to make our democracy work. In terms of what brought me here, I started my career as a New York City public school teacher in one of the most segregated districts in the country, the South Bronx, as the only Latina educator who was teaching content, right? Like thinking about myself as a bilingual person, speaking with my students and acknowledging that so many of them were in ESL, were in special education, and they and their parents either didn't have the right to remove themselves from those segregated tracks or didn't understand how to. I was thinking really deeply about systemic inequalities experienced by students that they say, like, this class is bullshit. I don't agree with this. I hate this teacher. I hate this school. I'm dropping out. No one's listening to me. And we tend to resist those as angsty teenagers, disrespectful kids, right? Really adultist, oftentimes racist and classist concepts. But I was interested in what are they telling me about the matriculation process here? What are they telling me about the content and the actual pedagogy, its effectiveness, and how does that implicate law and policy? So in 2014, I co-founded an organization called Integrate NYC. It was the first youth-led organization to support a youth-led movement for school integration, centering youth of color. So frequently when we think about school integration, we have this image of Little Rock Nine, Elizabeth Eckford walking in this crowd of angry white peers. We think of Ruby Bridges accompanied by the National Guard walking down steps. Those are beautiful images historically, but they really fail to acknowledge the intersectional harms that young people experienced once they were in the building. So the Little Rock Nine, I believe 2 of them graduated from that high school. The other 7 were pushed out or dropped out or transferred to other schools. And when you hear those elders speak about their experience, they talk about it only as traumatizing. It's not like, oh, thank the civil rights lawyers for getting me into predominantly white schools. That was not it. And so we brought young people together and we studied both the interventions to have integration happen and then youth voices on what it was actually like to be in those schools. And so we built a platform that centered experiences of young people and assumed in a school district that's 80% Black and Latino, and even probably about 85% Black, Latino, Asian, if I pull together some of the most recent numbers, it would be that integrated schools would be like that. Every school would be majority youth of color, and every school would be properly resourced. Every school would have responsive pedagogy that had a research backed. Every school would think intentionally about assessing youth's capacity, and that we would have teachers who had deep understandings and could mentor and empathize with their students. And we would remove barriers to entry like standardized exams and tours that were inhibitive for youth of color and low-income youth. So as I did that work, I realized that attorneys were potentially interested in like a charitable relationship, like, oh, we'll give an hour pro bono, we'll give 5 hours pro bono, we'll help you incorporate your organization, or we'll look at your policy platform. But there wasn't genuine interest in actually disrupting, right? Like if we think about a big corporate firm, and if Exxon says, I want this to happen, and they're paying $3 million a year, that firm finds a way forward. And so for me, I was like, what does it look like to find lawyers who are ready to throw down for young people and are ready to actually relate to them as clients with real interest? So that's where I founded the Peer Defense Project. We litigated Integrate NYC versus New York. It was the first youth-led plaintiffs search in the country, and we used technology all the way through. We did youth-centered plaintiff interviews on Zoom. We did trainings with young people on understanding attorney-client privilege, and they essentially were trained as legal assistants and then led the lawsuit, led the comms. And very much right now, that case is still on appeal in the courts. But from that and their legal consciousness that they built, they wanted to build more tech and more resources. And so that's how Peer Defense Project was born.
That's fascinating. And you know, what I love about this is how tech forward it is. I think as the generations continue, we're going to see that it becomes the most pivotal part in really educating young people on how to use our legal system and really learn how to integrate it with their needs. Now, when it came to, you mentioned a nonprofit when we were in the pre-call for this podcast. And can you tell me a little bit more about the nonprofit you created that was really focused on tech? Why did you pick tech as like a main focus for that?
Well, I didn't pick tech as the main focus. Essentially, tech ended up becoming what young people were asking us for. So when I first started Peer Defense Project, we were interested in litigating against the state of New York for segregating schools. It was really intended to just be this legal project that supported Integrate NYC. I had gone to law school with a mission to take the org that I had worked at and I had built as a teacher and essentially be able to bring legal action. But what we found was that when the young people, and when I say young, I mean 14 to 25, because we don't work with young people under 13 on the internet for federal reasons. And 14 to 17-year-olds are young people who've gotten consent from their parents to be part of social movement organizations. So when we started working with them, they hated the litigation. They hated it. And they liked one case, but they were bored, and it was very, very difficult. We basically had to run full law courses to teach them fully what was happening. Like if we think about informed consent and we think about clients genuinely understanding, you kind of have to teach your client like first year law school to genuinely understand the claims that you're making and genuinely be able to consent, right? And I think oftentimes we don't think of this analog, but I find litigation to be similar to surgery. If I'm going to do a hysterectomy on you, or I'm going to remove your finger, you need to fully understand what I'm doing, and that's difficult to do. And so I consider litigation with young people similarly, but that being said, as we were going through that process, once we had filed and once we're now still appealing on the papers, we're still in motion to dismiss phase and appeal, students wanted to do other things. They wanted other topics. They wanted to learn other kinds of lawyering. And so we studied legal empowerment with them. That's a movement to build alternative tools and training mechanisms to help people who don't have law degrees understand, use, and shape the law. And we also studied movement lawyering, which is a kind of lawyering that, in addition to shifting the material conditions of people, works to shift their institutional power and also works to shift their understanding of the law. Now, to be really clear, sometimes these are really hot words, and the idea is like, oh, I'm a cool movement lawyer, I'm a cool legal empowerment, versus I'm just a cog in the machine. That's not accurate, actually. People can be part of social movement organizations, and your clients can say that they don't actually feel more powerful around you. They actually don't feel like their ends have been met. You can be a public defender and really working with your client in a way that shifts their reality so that they know how to navigate that facility moving forward. They have shortened their sentence, and they also are able to work with other folks who are incarcerated to be able to build power from the inside. So I just want to elevate that. Now, that being said, when we were talking about this, students wanted to do more political education, legal education. They wanted to understand, how can we teach the law to our peers? And there were a couple barriers. We started this during COVID, and so we couldn't really get into school, so we had to use Zoom. Some other barriers were that we have something called unauthorized practice of law, which means that you have to have a supervising attorney to give advice, right? So we had to do a lot of research on studying the model of community paralegals and build relationships with allied attorneys who would supervise young people to go through some of our programs and then work on projects with them. Our most recent rendition of this technology is called the Youth Power Legal course. It is the first paralegal certification course in the country to provide free legal education to young people under the age of 18, so young people of working age in New York City, and a paralegal certificate under the supervision of an attorney and for free for young people who've been impacted by injustice. All of those young people are now going to be partnered with their paralegal certificate with a host organization that will take them and provide additional apprenticeship training. And we teach that through critical race theory, abolitionist lens, decolonizing lens, and also law and social movements. And the idea is we specifically look to work in places where their students may not have access to critical legal frameworks, and also there is a deregulated approach to paralegal certification. So in some states, you don't have to have a certain certification to be a paralegal, and paralegal programs run largely unregulated. And so that intersection of lack of access to critical race theory frameworks, lack of access to legal education, and also a piece of this deregulated market creates a space for us to build. The other piece of tech that I'll share is we have a help desk, a virtual help desk, in which the young people that we train sit as legal assistants with attorneys, and we provide free limited scope representation to young people and youth serving organizations in the jurisdictions where our attorneys have licenses. And so in that space, we can provide free legal advice, document review, we can file complaints for you. We don't litigate very much in that space. And what it does is provide free rapid response support for over 300 organizations in our network. So the flywheel here is that a young person comes to us, most of the times they're mobilized, they're engaged in some type of advocacy. They can get a paralegal certificate with us, consistent free legal limited scope representation. And then we have a network of over 4,000 attorneys, organizations, and advocacy groups that we can refer out when we don't have capacity to meet their legal needs. So you can see the tech is we use a lot of networking software to see where there are matches. We try to support support people like, hey, you should reach out to this person or that person. In terms of the help desk, it's virtual. If we get a large number of sessions on the help desk, we'll then do a webinar that addresses like a large issue and provide either training certificates or toolkits. And then, like I said, we have the actual paralegal certification program, which is specific to New York.
Wow. Sarah, this is incredible. I mean, you've got my mind racing so much. One thing, as a public defender, outside of, alongside the work that I do in legal technology, like one thing I'm very conscious of is that I am at the trial level working with a human life. And I very much feel that I sometimes am a cog in a machine because the power that I have is with this one person, not necessarily on systemic reformation, right? Then the flip side is the work that you're doing, where you're looking more at large at sort of like how to better the world in a way by like one person at a time, I suppose. And also you're tapping into this sort of segment of the population that was so rapidly and heavily and incredibly used and powerfully used during the civil rights movement without technology. I'm so interested to hear how you like how do you sort of not get jaded? Like where is it inside? What is the thing that exists inside you where you're around things that you're fighting, these systems that you're fighting and trying to change, and that perpetually I maybe let people down? And how do you, like, where are you drawing your motivation from? Or I guess I'm really curious about that. What keeps you going?
Mm-hmm. Well, the first thing I want to say is that I would never say public defenders are a cog in the machine. Like, I just would never say that. I was a public school teacher. Was I a cog in the machine? Yeah, we all are. We take a vow to uphold the Constitution. We're all a cog in the machine if you have a law degree and a bar license, right? Like, we're in a cog in the machine. I'm sure I am supporting some large conglomerate organization by being in this technology that then's going to be, I don't know. But I think I find that righteousness to be really unhelpful for people and dismissive. What I'm more interested in is, did your client ask for you? Is your client consenting to have your representation? Are you creating accountability metrics for your client to determine and understand if they want to be working with you anymore or they want to work with someone else? And there's all kinds of complexity with that, right? But for me, I'm more interested in that. And I think of like, people are being poisoned in our society by harm and injustice. And if we think of sort of a river, I'm working more like, I'm kind of walking up and down the river, both upstream to see what's poisoning people, but then kind of jogging downstream to help people once they're poisoned. And along the lines, like, we need people who aren't running up and down. Like, some people we need who are just like actually thinking structurally, and some people we need to like stay right there and just wait till the bodies come down and you are able to sort of support them and bring them back to health or in some way, right? So I think of public defenders as people who are like, you're triaging extreme harm. And that's not to say I don't think there are incredible structural issues with public defense offices around the country, but I respect people who are intentionally thinking about how to innovate from within them. In terms of what gives me hope, I mean, I don't know. I'm at a point right now where I also find it, I tell my students regularly, like, your cynicism is unhelpful. In fact, it's harmful. Right? Like, I have a law degree. I teach at a law school. I have a law license. I have multiple fancy degrees, and I can pay for my housing, my healthcare, and I mean, my education is largely in debt, but we'll see if the public service loan forgiveness program stands up and my dreams come true. But what do I have to, like, I'm here, I'm alive, I have these resources, and I take care of myself to structure boundaries and surround myself with people that really elevate my energy. And I think about my students. My students are incredible. I mean, if anyone's taught at a large public school and a law school in a state with like a really diverse group of people, you can't get better than that. It like is the picture of democracy, right? And it's like, we're in class debating the executive order that came out yesterday from a libertarian, utilitarian, and egalitarian standpoint, and thinking through a legal realist lens of how the court might decide on that executive order. Like, that's my dream. I love my work. And when I come home, I watch television, a lot of it. And I eat cereal, and I have a dog. So like, I guess, those pieces in the university are really helpful. I love working at Rutgers. It is an incredible place. And also, I work in a nonprofit that's a worker self-directed nonprofit. So we share in leadership. We do participatory budgeting work. We do consent-based workplace practices, and it's small. It's a small team. So that also takes off this like executive privilege, like I should say, the like all of the pressure and privilege of like, I am the one exec, and if I fail, no one gets paid. Like, we've all consented to this budget. We all know what money's coming in, and we've all done scenario planning. So if all of our hours get cut next month, all of our hours get cut. Like, we really bring that heterodox economic framework. So those are things like surrounding myself with the right people, like not being like righteous about who's in and who's out, but like really committed and acknowledging my privilege and access, and then also working with small groups of like-minded people. Like, I'm really about depth over scope right now.
Love that. And I'm curious, you mentioned being, really loving your job as a professor at Rutgers. How are you really empowering the students you have to take on new youth-led movements?
Yeah. Well, I think it's two things, right? Like, not every student wants to work with youth-led movements or progressive youth-led movements, right? And I'm in a public school, so I have an accountability and a responsibility to make sure that I support all of my students. So in con law specifically, I lean in very, very heavy to a legal realist lens. I teach my students that we all have values, we all have ideologies. Judges, no matter what they wear, also have ideologies and also have opinions and all of those things. We then have doctrine. Doctrine is a result of that, but also sort of what maintains the legitimacy of courts versus courts just tweeting a meme about a decision on someone's life. And then we have outcomes, and those outcomes have like factual patterns and they have legal patterns. And so my thing with students is like, I will criticize any president who I think has a lack of integrity. I talk about FDR 24/7. I talk about Obama. I talk about President Trump. All of those presidents have had moments of extreme lack of integrity from their stated values or for what people expected from them. And so when I talk to students, I push hard not on, would you vote the same way that I vote, but does your ideology stand up? Like, is it libertarian for you to have your hands all over my healthcare? Is it egalitarian for you to silence me when you don't like what I'm saying? No, it's not. And so let's actually like get real here and talk about the privileges that we have. And I told them, you're in law school. You can't just be out here like watching a commercial and listening to a podcast and now you're decided on an issue. You have access to materials and information that other people don't have, and your job is to solve problems and summarize things clearly to make democracy work. That's my opinion. That's what it means to uphold the Constitution. So, or the promise of it. So I guess like that's what I love about it is like my students are down for that. They are down to do that. They are there seriously to learn. They are not there to pipeline themselves into an executive branch that is out here to harm our society. They are there specifically to learn and to improve themselves, and they're open to each other and ideas. And I also just love the history of Rutgers. Rutgers Newark is known as the People's Electric Law School. So we have a history of working with social movements. And I love being a part of that. And also, I'm a first-gen college grad. I'm Latina. I'm queer. I'm a woman. I'm in my mid-30s. Like, it is a huge honor for me to have that. And I represent a very small population of people who have access to this kind of opportunity. So, like, I feel blessed. I feel grateful. And I feel like in community with solid people. I just think that, like, part of anti-democratic moments are everyone becomes afraid and cynical and divided. And like, if instead I can remain as like inspired, connected, and like committed and value aligned, and I can do that at Rutgers.
Nice.
That's incredible. Sarah, one of the things that I find with my students is, or one of the lessons, and I think maybe it's a cliche at this point, especially in a courtroom practice, is like, I really want you to know how to listen. Like, I really, 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 it's so important to me to understand that silence is an okay thing, and really like use those first meetings with your clients to get to know them and hear them and not sort of info spew on them. And really like, I mean, it's a human principle, I think, at its core, that then, in my opinion, leads to really good advocacy. Then the flip side of that is the advocacy front. It's the time when you take all of the things that you've done and you actually really are advocating for whatever it is that you're advocating for. But those are two sides, two really important sides to maybe the same coin. I also feel like right now, especially with tech, like so many different voices and movements are amplified, and there is so much noise that it becomes hard to just pay attention to the listening side of it, and all you're inundated with is just loud advocacy from all sides on all issues, 100 all the time. How do you how do you balance those two forces, first of all, and then how do you carve out a really unique, loud advocacy that stands out?
Yeah. Well, have you guys, I hate this question. You're like, have you read, Like, there's a great book. How about I do that? Wonder if you come across it. It's Cal Newport's Slow Productivity. He also wrote Deep Work. He's like a MBA business. Oh, you've read Deep Work? That's fine. Most people don't read, like all the books in my show. I mean, I could count on whatever. I see Joe has a lot of books. Joe, I don't think you've read everything cover to cover. Let's be honest. Yeah, no. There are references is in addition to like, right, there are all of those things. Anyway, so Adrian, shout out to you for effective summarizing. Shout out to the law students, summarize effectively. Okay. You cannot read everything. We talk about this regularly. Okay. So anyway, I did read Deep Work cover to cover. It's a rare occurrence for me. But that book was phenomenal. And that was a pre-COVID book. And what Cal Newport talked about, now keep in mind, he doesn't really have much of like a critical racial gendered lens in it, but I find it to be quite helpful for people from a variety of different experiences. He talks about how, in this fast moving time, very much of what you're sharing, Joe, we are at our lowest cognitive capacity. Like, not, and I think when we say listening, it's very value laden, right? It's like, it's a good thing to listen. I genuinely think people are burned out and tapped out. Like, I actually think people are just fried. Like, I am talking to a fried egg most of the time. Like, it's just not, like, we're not here because we're so inundated with very traumatizing information. And if you think like, oh, there she is, like a Rutgers snowflake, war is traumatizing. So are fires that burn down cities. And if it doesn't, I'm worried about what you are. If I'm a snowflake, I'm worried about it. Okay. But like, those are traumatizing things. And if you have been untouched by any of these traumatizing moments, I haven't met a single person who has been, right? So, or maybe they don't speak to anyone. I don't know. But anyway, in this moment, people are getting so much inundation that Cal Newport says we need to like quit social media. I'm not, pause. I know you're a podcast. Give me a second. Quit social media, drain the shallows, embrace boredom, and like track our progress, right? So what I've done is I have seriously limited social media. I do not have, or I have like shells of like a TikTok, a Instagram. I don't have those apps. I don't use them. I don't have, what I do have is I have LinkedIn. I have our website. And my email is like, that's my TikTok. Like, I just really narrow what I do. I also time block a lot. And I don't commit to things that I don't think are aligned with strategic planning that I make in partnership with other people. So I think that's the piece too, is that his new book says, I'm like a Cal Newport groupie, it's fine. His new book says, work slowly, obsess over quality. No, sorry. Work at a human pace. Do less. There you go. Do less. Work at a human pace and obsess over quality. And I love that, right? Like, do less. And that can be social media, right? He kind of backed away from that a little bit and is more like, maybe social media is your thing. Well, then deep work it. And obsess over quality. Like, if I can't obsess over the quality of our chatbot that we're making or our help desk, if I can't be just like tinkering every single week and asking if I'm hitting a milestone or hitting a quarterly goal or hitting a strategic plan, whether that's in my scholarship or in my team, then I'm doing too much. So I think that like that's my real philosophy around this. I listen to the news for 15 minutes a day and then I don't know the news.
But then Sarah, I really fall in that camp too. I think like depth, you said it from the outset, I think in a really nice way, depth over scope. And maybe that's another version of what you just said. One of the things when we talk about advocacy, though, and again, we're going back to civil rights movement, people always talk about, things that happened in the 60s without realizing the foundation that was laid in tiny anonymous courts around the country for decades prior to that. So from an advocacy point of view, too, if you do the depth over scope sort of proposition, I think you're signing yourself up for a lot of like short-term, potentially sadness and difficulty. Like the thing that I'm fighting for right now is not a result that I'm going to see until maybe ever, but definitely maybe not for years. I have to lay the foundation. But those moments of advocacy are with people, right? So you're this movement that is being built for long-term like vision or success is then coming off these short-term losses, I suppose, with people, right? And I guess I'm trying to figure out too, like how you consider that. Depth over scope when it comes to like daily habits is one thing. When it comes to advocacy and you're looking at someone's life, that feels like a different sort of thing to digest.
And listen, we're in different worlds, right? Like I do when you're in the role of a public defender, you are in a different I don't know what I would develop for myself as a framework. It would be different than the way I'm talking right now. Right? Like when you're in a public defender's office, you might have 80 clients, right? Like depth over scope, like how many hours, how are you have a scope. So then some people just aren't on your dock, right? Like, so I'm talking about from a place where I have a lot of freedom to, right? Like to determine my workflow. It's a huge privilege to do that. But even when I was teaching and I taught 6th through 12th grade and I was teaching hundreds of students who were from all around the world and were coming in and were asylum seekers and had extreme trauma, I was trying to obsess over quality for a few things. I was like, what is the very specific goal I have for this class? And how do I make sure to hit it at least at 60%? Like, is it to graduate? Is it, and like, what are the evidence and research-based interventions that get me there? Like, I feel like my partner often talks about like a master of frameworks. Like, I feel like it's just like really committing, like telling a group of people, this is what I can do. Here are the tools that I have. This is the amount of hours that I have, and then doing it. Like, I guess I should say depth over scope. What is really at the core of that is integrity. Am I doing what I said I was going to do, even when people aren't looking? That's I think what depth over scope is. And I think Adrian Marie Brown, that's not my term, when she said depth over scope, I think what she's trying to say is like, let's say you're progressive and you believe in intersectionality and you believe in all these compounded issues need to be addressed vis-a-vis state interventions, okay? And also community interventions. You have a lot of thinking to do. Like, I just think, right, like doing that in a city, like, is anyone paying attention to New York City right now? Like, just focus on New York City, right? We have incredible housing crisis, incredible disrespect from our mayor, incredible lack of integrity all over the place, to the point where people are quitting the DA's office because they can't even stomach what they're being asked to do, right? Like that, if that's a lot of depth. So I guess when I say scope is like, pick one issue and do it well. And I think what we do get, in addition to this inundation of social media, is whether that's your investors, whether that's your donors, whether it's scale. How are you scaling? I am not answering to scale. If you said I have to do 5, I'm doing 5. If you said I have to hit this many people, next year I'm not telling you I'm hitting 100,000 more. I'm going to tell you I'm going to do something different with that constituency. And I think like pushing back and dealing with that, I think also helps with the inundation, because it's a farce. Like, it's a farce that in this moment, we can just keep growing our impact more and more and more as things get worse and worse and worse with this much more capacity.
Well said. Now, I want to kind of turn back to what we touched on in the beginning of the conversation. That was really like educating youth and really providing them the resources to empower themselves. What has been one of the key things you find young people are surprised by when they learn about the legal system? Or like a key tip that's like, whoa, I really wish I would have learned this. Well, I'm happy I learned this now.
Okay. I also really want to hear Joe's thought on this too, because again, like we work in very different experiences. We are in the country that incarcerates the most number of people in the world, and I work on the outside mostly. So like Joe's gonna have more like thinking around this too that I think we should like frame as well. But so if I think about the three problems that I spoke about like marginalization of young people. They can't vote, they can't run for office, they can't make campaign contributions, and yet they can work. They can be incarcerated for decades, right? Like we have huge hypocrisies in terms of how our law relates to young people. For those young people who are mobilizing, academics and practitioners, we often silence them by trying to speak for them. And so that's another sort of like area. And then the third I think I spoke about was access to justice. I think it's like 93% of people, and this is not even disaggregated by age, don't get their civil legal needs met that are low income. And when we're saying low income, like we're not including a huge constituency of people who can't afford $600 for like a tire change. But anyway, so in terms of what you were saying, the biggest surprise, I would say for young people who are historically marginalized and aren't yet mobilized, what I noticed is like the biggest surprise in that group, meaning they haven't yet started to develop like a political consciousness to like mobilize and they just want to get access to the resources, is that it's like disconnecting law from the criminal legal system. Like so many young people living at the intersection of harm and poverty really relate to lawyers just as like highly educated cops. Like it really, that like you're a lawyer, you can send me to jail. They're not wrong though, right? Like they're not wrong. Like seeing all people in the legal profession as dangerous, I think is something that is like can shift and is surprising when it's like, oh, law can be, and when it's not between either I have to be a lawyer or a lawyer can hurt me. Like when there's a range of ways to relate to the legal profession, a range of ways to relate to legal advocacy, that is like a surprise, I would say, for young people. Because of course, if your parents been incarcerated, if you face deportation proceedings, if you've been separated from your parents with the family regulation system, I mean, I'm focusing on that. I'm not focusing on like, oh, this cool civil rights lawyer who works like downtown, right? Like, so I think the range of legal advocacy and roles you can play and ways that law is part of every area of our life, I think that's interesting. That's like an interesting surprise and like a little bit of like a light bulb that it's not just trauma or it's not just me being the first lawyer in my family. I think for the mobilized young people, that there are some lawyers that share their political views. That I think is what tends to be the surprise there. Is like, oh, you also are critical of courts. Oh, you also are critical of white supremacy and the ways in which the legal profession is the least diverse profession in the United States. Like, you don't think that's okay? Oh, like you're also critical of unauthorized practice of law? Like, oh, legal realism? Like, you also think the Supreme Court has biases, right? Like, attorneys being willing to be forthcoming about that. That I notice is like a real shift for young people who are mobilized. And then I would say around access to justice, I think understanding like how much once young people who are mobilized, marginalized, a combination of the two, whatever, understand like the basics of like the intersection of law and civics. Once I like open up Westlaw and show them what's there, once I open up like I explain LegalZoom and how it works, once I share a legal toolkit, it's like, oh my God, like all of this stuff is just available. You just have all of it, right? Like I think the gatekeeping is the thing that becomes like the most shocking. So I think it's like, and all of those three things, right? Like the first group, not understanding the range of possibilities and uses of law, the misunderstanding that some lawyers do actually align politically, and then the idea that all of these things can be made available to you, that's all part of how the legal system is set up, though. Like, it's set up to build like an elite governing class of people who are able to determine people's lives and how society works under the guise of like being technicians. Like, we're not technicians. We really are impacting systems. So I think that like when I see that surprise, that helps me to design a new piece of tech or a new educational programming, right? Like, around the understanding different kinds of law, we have a free law library on our website that shows like all these different areas like protest, voting, school suspension. We have webinars in which we do trainings. We do like know your system. So it's less about like know your rights in this particular way when you meet a cop, and more about like understand this whole like web. And then, you know, thinking about the different political views, we are very forthcoming about our political views. We talk very critically about capitalism. We talk critically about the Constitution. And we do that because I do this because I love this country and I love my community and I want people to be able to improve it. And then for the last piece around like the access, we make tools like the AI chatbot, which we're working on right now. We're making tools like the virtual help desk, which we do right now, and the training webinars, QR codes that we bring all around the city. We did a subway campaign this past year that had 24 million impressions where we did subway ads with QR codes, and it said like, I use the law to fight for a free Puerto Rico. I use the law to protect my peace at a protest. I use the law to protect my my art on Instagram. And like really like shifting how we get that access so young people don't think of it as like a wall in front of them.
Sarah, you just mentioned some impressions there a second ago. I'm curious, like what I'm actually really interested in is of all of the content, of all of the different sort of tools, that webinars, everything that you're putting, where have you seen the most engagement? Like what has been maybe predictably engaging or what has given you the most surprise?
Unfortunately, the things that have gotten the most attention have been the things that people are most afraid of. So essentially right now, like one of our events was on nonprofit defense work in the age of like very vague concepts of what does it mean to be terrorist supporting? What does it mean, right? Like those that has gotten those toolkits, those webinars, those sessions have gotten a lot of attention. What happens when ICE comes to your school? What are your rights? What are safety plans? What are resources? What are options, right? Like that has gotten a lot, whether we have it in a guide or we have it in a webinar or on our help desk, that's a lot of the hits. Another thing is how to support trans youth, particularly at school boards, right? So in terms of, it's been in the last 90 days, very issue-based. Prior to the last 90 days, what people were using our materials for, either looking at in our library or going on our help desk or asking for trainings, were how to move money around. And I think what's interesting about that is, young people, because they sort of are regarded as proto-citizens, like not full citizens, and youth law, children's law comes from property law. Like young people were owned by their fathers and as their mothers were, and under coverture and of course enslavement, we have that as well. We can get into that another time, but the idea that young people can have property is like a really gray area, right? So like if a 16-year-old wants to incorporate an organization, what do they need to do? If an 18-year-old wants to do a mutual aid fund and collect $5,000 to build a roof in Puerto Rico, what do they do? So a lot of what I got, which was really surprising to me, was transactional lawyering. Workplace violations was a big thing as well. Moving money around for mutual aid, starting organizations. Those were like a huge area that I had not anticipated. And then last year, after protests erupted on school campuses, a lot of the requests were particularly trainings and help desks around moving through administrative proceedings, understanding what would happen if you were expelled from school. So it has recently shifted by issue, and I think that's a result of culture wars. I think that's a result of like fear mongering that's happening. But prior to that, it was about money and corporation and building power with resources. I don't even think this is a hot take. I mean, people would say it's a hot take. We should be letting children vote as early as we are incarcerating them. That is my hottest take. And if we don't, and I don't believe we should be incarcerating children. And so essentially what I'm saying is that I believe that as young as we believe that we should be able to detain a young person, then that young person should be able to vote. And I don't believe in detaining young people. So I think that maybe that's my double hot take. I don't know, Joe, what's your hot take?
As someone who's represented juveniles across like rural parts of Texas, and the process by which that is set up, and this, all of the sort of the theater that goes into making them feel like adults in that moment, which is weirdly twisted. I don't know if I can clearly give you a hot take, because what you just said actually is something I've never thought about before, and that hit me really hard. You'd have to give me a moment. I really that derailed me, because I also think so much about the way that youth have been used throughout movements that have led to some really incredible results. But the way, I'm immediately thinking of Birmingham in the 60s, and the way that youth were critical to results there. But then everyone, it felt like, was like feeling a little queasy about their use, the way that they were used, and even the verb that I'm using, to use, feels a little bit wrong. So I guess what I'm doing is spinning my wheels in front of you both right now, trying to figure out if I come up with a hot take.
We need to spin our wheels together. And I really would love to connect offline with both of you and just figure out how we keep building together, because I love what you're doing. Would be happy to refer some people to you. And yeah, thank you for this space. I thought it was going to be like, I don't know, you're going to be asking me a lot more about data or something. But this was really such a pleasant surprise. Great. Well, I'll email both of you. Joe would love to connect offline too about like law school stuff.
Up next on Between the Briefs.
We got to ask ourselves, is the snowball easier to stop at the top of the hill, or the avalanche midway down the hill or at the bottom of the hill? So the more you train yourself to recognize those triggers, I have a martial arts background, so my hands start to kind of clench and I start feeling the pulse in my fingers almost.
Stay tuned for the full interview coming to you soon. Between the Briefs is brought to you by Steno. To find out more about Steno and how we combine exceptional court reporting and litigation support services to deliver a superior litigation experience, visit steno.com. That's STENO.com. And then make sure to search for Between the Briefs in Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or anywhere else you get your podcasts, and click subscribe so you don't miss any future episodes. On behalf of the team here at Steno, thanks for listening.